easy takeaways from the first game. Obviously, Anthony Edwards is good at basketball. Beyond that, and we can touch more on that, but beyond that, just big picture takeaways from game one.
Ooh, buddy, this Minnesota defense is so fun to watch. And I really enjoyed the work that we saw from Jaden McDaniels, Anthony Edwards getting the first possession against Jamal Murray, the work he was able to do. We did see Minnesota continue the gambit of let's put Cat on Jokic, or let's just put our 4 on Jokic, let Rudy Gobert roam around. And I think that had an impact in the pick and roll game, but also with some of the post-ups. You didn't see a lot of doubles from Minnesota in this one, but you kind of see Rudy lurking over. And I think that impacted some of the shots that Jokic took. And all makeable shots for Jokic for the most part. So I would imagine we see a bit of a bounce back in terms of efficiency in game 2. But looking at some of the shot types you don't get the heavy free throw game from Jokic. Ultimately, you don't get a lot of offensive rebounds for Denver. They weren't able to get the extra chances going there. And I think Minnesota was able to do a good job of getting out on the break, getting some easy ones, but also just getting into their attacks early. I think that really helped Anthony Edwards get downhill. And to kind of bounce off of the Anthony Edwards is good at basketball point, I made the point after the Sun series, it felt like a really mature series against Phoenix for him. And that continued into the game 1 against Denver. And something that just been popping for me now, because I've been trying to see how teams are trying to load up help against him. What are the Wolves doing to kind of counter that with cuts or just their general spacing? What Anthony Edwards is doing from basically the 14-foot marker to 20 feet, just inside the arc. His comfort there has grown so much. The timing of his drives when he is going early, or even when he wants to slow it up against a mismatch and kind of ISO, he's doing such a great job of carving out space for himself with some of those shoulder nudges and getting into those mid-range jumpers. The mid-range comfort in general is so much better for Anthony Edwards. This is a development that Steve and I have been talking about during the regular season. It's really popped in this postseason, and it certainly popped in game 1. The amount of times that he just moved KCP out of the way, moved Justin Holiday out of the way. When he has that going, you're already scared of him as a driver. Now he mixes in some of those pull-up threes as well. It's just an avalanche for Anthony Edwards. And you mix in the more mature playmaking as well. He was frankly the best player on the floor. 43 points speaks to it. But in all facets of the game, he was just on. It was a joy to watch.
I had a feeling you were going to go Anthony Edwards, so I'll tie it back to JJ's point about other people lifting up the team. You heard Coach Michael Malone postgame. Mike Conley, Karl-Anthony Towns, Naz Reid. Now remember, Anthony Edwards had 25 in the first half on 10 to 17 shooting. Minnesota was losing. Mm-hmm. Then you have Mike Conley, 11 in the third. Cat, 11 in the third. Naz Reid, 14 in the fourth. I think that collective adds to the playmaking blend and growth that we've seen from Anthony Edwards. When Mike Conley can hurt you on and off the ball, and now Minnesota can use him in movement sets, you got to remember, Denver's a defense that, whether it's drop, whether it's at the level, they need their rotations to be in. They need to be able to help and recover. If Mike can now make you pay off ball, if you can skip and hit Cat for a 3, if Naz Reid is going to be able to drive at that kind of level, it becomes difficult to deal with. And now everything Anthony Edwards does has even more of an impact. Karl-Anthony Towns, for his drives to be able to hold up in this matchup against Aaron Gordon, I think that's very important. I think that this is a little bit of a different series for Denver in the respect that what popped for me in game 1 was Minnesota's drives. They just kept driving the ball. They kept driving the ball. And so you could be locked in with your pick and roll scheme. You could be locked in with your coverage, but once a team starts playing outside of the play, you got to defend. And so Denver's got to get used to closing out and keeping the ball in front and not giving up that kind of penetration. I think that's a huge element of it. If Minnesota's going to be able to score off their sets and one-on-one play, it gets really tough. I'm glad you mentioned the defense, Nekias, of the Wolves, because I know everyone wants to point to, I thought Rudy Gobert did a great job roaming off Aaron Gordon, no matter where he was, no matter what the scenario was, he was there. I am very intrigued to see how Denver responds to what they've seen, because we've talked about how powerful the Gordon, Jokic, Murray actions are. Rudy Gobert did a really good job of stunting and recovering to the lob a few times. The tricky part is Jokic, they will clear a wing. He'll stop short on the roll. He'll get to his spot. Jokic had fun with the Rudy Gobert matchup. No disrespect. And that's a lot of space for Jamal Murray. And so the screen navigation was great for Minnesota in game 1. If they get dinged in their separation, that's going to be a lot of pressure on Minnesota if Jamal Murray's getting downhill. If now Jokic is able to maybe get a screen from Gordon early in a possession, and now Rudy's just on Jokic to start, does that take away from it? So I'm kind of trying to see, do they set higher pick and rolls? They get into their actions earlier. Do they get Jokic the ball in different areas? How do they move Gordon around? How Denver counters that's going to be key, because they're going to have to figure out how to kind of poke at that. How do we get Cat uncomfortable in the drop? How do we make Rudy's help feel a little bit different? I'm intrigued by that.
I think that's the key point of this entire series, is how do we move Gobert around? How do we create space for Jamal Murray? Jokic, I'm not worried about. I'm just not. Like, he's going to figure stuff out. Jamal Murray, to me, has to be the guy that he was last year in the playoffs. He does. He has to be an efficient volume scorer, not just a volume scorer. He's got to be an efficient volume scorer against this defense. And that's tough to do. And so creating separation for him, creating space for him, getting Gobert to move around. I said this in our preview of this series this week on the Shaq podcast. That's the whole key to me, because Gordon is a non-spacer, and against most teams, even on cross matches, most teams don't have the size. Minnesota does. So that Gobert, Gordon, however you can manipulate either space or getting Gobert on Jokic, that is the key. To me, that is the key. The last thing I want to say on this, well, I want to say two more things, but you talked about the maturity of Anthony Edwards. Like, Legler brought this up in the Phoenix series. It was the game where he was like 3 for 11 or 3 for 12. And instead of forcing the action and he just played the right way. He just made the right reads. Okay, it's not my night. I'm going to approach this in a mature way. Sure, the growth from the mid-range, massive. I think just the growth in mindset from this guy from his rookie year to now is phenomenal. And look, Patrick Beverley said this a few years ago when we had him on the podcast. He's like, he's Michael Jordan. Like, that's his ceiling. That's how good this guy is. Mike Conley said this the other day. Mike Conley doesn't hyperbolize like that, right? So this guy now, and we've seen it, not just like, oh, he's scoring or, oh, he's playmaking. Like, everything about him right now is mature and with a killer mindset. That to me is like the popping point. Last thing on Gobert, the clip went everywhere, and I want to touch on him breaking up that Jokic to Gordon lob. Jokic in the short roll, Gobert steps up a little bit. Jokic throws the lob to Gordon in the dunker spot. We've seen that play a gazillion times. I don't know that anybody's ever played it better. And I've talked throughout the year. We talked about it briefly with Gobert when he was on the pod a few weeks ago. This idea of being in two places at once, that is literally what I'm talking about. You think back to the 21 finals, the play that Giannis made, he's in pick and roll coverage. Devin Booker comes off to his right hand, makes a ridiculous one-hand underhand lob pass to DeAndre Ayton. Giannis recovers for the block. And I said at the time, I know of one other guy in the world that can make that play, and it's Rudy Gobert. And that's an example of a play like that. Now there's another guy now, Victor Wembanyama, but I would say he can make that play too. But that play encapsulates. It's the example. It's like the clip I would play every single time I talk about a big being in two places at once. That is the play, and there's just not many people in the world that can do it. And that is why Rudy Gobert is so fucking good.
There we go. Just very quickly, 10-second thing, JJ, just to save your comment section. I just want to throw another big in the ring
sure.
that can make that play.
Sure, fine.
Bam out of bio.
Okay, you know what?
I do it.
That is, you know what? You're 100% correct, and I'm sorry, Bam. I've actually talked about that with Bam before, so I'm sorry. There's a handful of guys. Okay, please comment. Whoever you think could be in two places at once as well. All right, please comment. Thank you.